A rap superstar dies with only $50,000 in his bank account. His kids had to decide whether to keep him alive or let him go. His mansion sits empty and broken, covered in graffiti. This man sold over 74 million records and made more than $70 million, but he died owing money to the government. His name was DMX, and this is the real story nobody wants to tell you. Before we start, let me tell you something crazy that happened just last week. I was researching this story when I found out that DMX's abandoned house is still standing today, and people are still breaking into it to take pictures. That house tells the whole story of what happens when talent meets tragedy. But first, you need to understand something that nobody talks about. DMX wasn't just another rapper who got famous and messed up his life. He was a man who survived things that would have destroyed most people before they turned 18. His story isn't just about drugs and money, miss. It's about how childhood trauma can follow you your entire life, even when you have everything the world says should make you happy. Earl Simmons was born in 1970 in Mount Vernon, New York. But his childhood was nothing like what you see in movies. His dad left when Earl was just a baby. His mom, Arnett, had serious mental problems and was addicted to drugs. She would beat Earl so hard that he would pass out. Sometimes she would kick him out of the house for days, and he had to sleep in abandoned buildings and eat from garbage cans. By the time he was 10 years old, Earl was already stealing food just to survive. Here's something that will blow your mind. When Earl was in juvenile detention, he wasn't just sitting around feeling sorry for himself. He was studying other kids, learning their stories, understanding their pain. This is where he developed his ability to connect with people through music. He realized that everyone had darkness inside them, and if he could put that darkness into words, people would listen. When Earl finally got out of the system at 17, he was basically homeless. He would sleep in different places every night. Sometimes in abandoned cars, sometimes in 24-hour laundromats, sometimes on park benches. During the day, he would go to local barbershops and street corners, rapping for whoever would listen. People started calling him the dog, because of the way he would bark and growl during his performances. This wasn't an acting, this was Earl channeling the animal instinct that kept him alive on the streets. But here's where the story gets interesting. While Earl was in one of these detention centers, he heard something that changed his life forever. Another kid was rapping, and Earl realized that when he put his pain into words and rhythm, it didn't hurt as much. He started writing his own raps about sleeping on the streets and being hungry. Other kids would gather around to listen because his words were so real and powerful. When Earl got out, he started calling himself DMX. The letters stood for Dark Man X. Dark Man because of all the pain inside him, and X because his future was unknown. He would go to local clubs and battle other rappers, but DMX was different. While other rappers talked about money and cars they didn't have, DMX talked about pain everyone could feel. He didn't just rap in, he would growl and bark like a wild animal. People had never heard anything like it. Now let me tell you about something that changed everything for DMX, but also planted the seeds of his destruction. In 1991, he met a group called Rough Riders Entertainment. These weren't just music industry people, they were street guys who understood where DMX came from. The Rough Riders saw something special in DMX that other people missed. They understood that his aggression wasn't just anger, it was passion that had been twisted by pain. The Rough Riders gave DMX something he had never had before. A family that believed in him. D-Dean, Wah-Dean, and Swizz Beatz became like brothers to him. They didn't try to change DMX or make him more commercial. Instead, they helped him perfect his raw style and build a following in the underground rap scene. But here's the thing that most people don't understand about this time period. While DMX was building his career, he was also building his addiction. The same streets that gave him his musical inspiration also gave him access to drugs, and crack cocaine was cheap, powerful, and everywhere. DMX later said that he first tried crack when he was 14, but it didn't become a daily habit until he was in his 20s, right around the time his music career was taking off. Now here's something that will shock you. DMX tried to get signed to a record label over 100 times before anyone said yes. Imagine being rejected 100 times and still believing in yourself. That's exactly what separated DMX from everyone else. Here's something that will shock you about DMX's success. It wasn't gradual. When his first album dropped in 1998, he went from being unknown to being one of the biggest stars in America literally overnight. It's Dark and Hell is Hot didn't just sell well, it changed rap music forever. Other rappers had talked about street life before, but nobody had ever been this raw, this honest, this vulnerable. The album had songs that scared people and songs that made them cry. Rough Riders' anthem was pure aggression that made you want to fight somebody. But then you had Slippin', which was DMX talking about his addiction and his pain in a way that made grown men cry. This combination of toughness and vulnerability was something rap had never seen before. What made DMX different from other rappers wasn't just his voice or his style, it was his honesty. When he rapped about selling drugs, you believed him because he had really done it. When he rapped about sleeping on the streets, you felt it because he had really lived it. When he rapped about wanting to die, it was terrifying because you knew he meant it. But here's what nobody talks about. Success almost killed DMX faster than failure would have. When you give someone who has never had anything suddenly millions of dollars, it can be more dangerous than keeping them poor. DMX went from not knowing where his next meal was coming from, to having more money than he could count. And with that money came opportunities to buy more drugs than he had ever imagined. But that was just the beginning. Something incredible happened next that had never happened before in music history. DMX released his second album called Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood, just 8 months later, and it also went to #1. Then he did it again with And Then There Was X. Then again with The Great Depression, then one more time with Grand Champ. DMX became the first artist ever to have 5 albums in a row go straight to #1. Let me put that in perspective for you. Michael Jackson never did that. Jay-Z never did that. Eminem never did that. Only DMX. His song Party Up became one of the biggest rap songs ever made. X Gon' Give It To Ya became so famous that they still use it in movies today. Let me tell you something about DMX's movie career that most people don't know. When Hollywood came calling, DMX almost turned them down. He didn't think he could act, and he was scared of embarrassing himself. But the directors who wanted to work with him saw something special. They saw that DMX didn't need to act because he was naturally dramatic and intense. His first movie Belly was more than just a film. It was a cultural event. DMX played a character who was basically a version of himself, and his performance was so real that it scared some viewers. The movie didn't make huge money at the box office, but it became a cult classic that people still watch today. Then came Romeo Must Die with Jet Li, and this is where DMX proved he could be a real movie star. The film made over $91 million worldwide, and DMX's scenes were some of the most memorable. But here's the crazy part. DMX was high during some of the filming. His addiction was getting worse, but he was still professional enough to show up and do his job. Exit Wounds and Cradle to the Grave followed, and each movie made DMX richer and more famous. But each movie also gave him more access to drugs, and more pressure to maintain his image as the tough guy from the streets. The movie studios loved DMX because he brought authenticity to action films, but they had no idea how much pain he was carrying inside. With all that money, DMX lived like a king. He bought a massive mansion in Westchester County, New York, that was worth over $2 million. He owned dozens of luxury cars, motorcycles, and ATVs. He was famous for being generous. He would give thousands of dollars to random people on the street, and always took care of his family and friends. Now I'm going to tell you about something that shows just how deep DMX's addiction had become. In 2003, at the height of his fame, DMX was spending over $500 a day on crack cocaine. That's more than most people make in a week, and he was spending it every single day on drugs. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about the amount of drugs his body needed to function. By this time, DMX wasn't getting high to party or have fun. He was using drugs just to feel normal, just to get through the day. When you're that deep into addiction, you're not really living, you're just surviving from one hit to the next. And that's exactly what was happening to one of the most successful rappers in the world. The scary part is that nobody around DMX could stop him, even though they could see what was happening. His friends, his family, his business partners, they all knew he was destroying himself, but addiction is more powerful than love, more powerful than money, more powerful than fame. It takes over your brain and makes you choose drugs over everything else, even when you know it's killing you. DMX would disappear for days at a time, and nobody would know where he was. Sometimes he would be found in crack houses in the worst parts of the city. Other times he would be in expensive hotels, but still doing the same thing, smoking crack until he passed out. The contrast was crazy. One day he would be performing for thousands of screaming fans, and the next day he would be unconscious in some abandoned building. DMX didn't hide his drug problem. He rapped about it in songs like Slippin', where he talked about trying to get clean but always going back to drugs. He was honest in interviews about his addiction, but being honest about a problem and actually fixing it are two completely different things. As DMX's drug use got worse, his behavior became unpredictable. He would show up late to concerts or not show up at all. Sometimes he would disappear for days during recording sessions. Fans would buy tickets to see him perform, and he wouldn't even come to the show. This hurt his reputation and cost him millions of dollars in lost opportunities. The legal problems started piling up fast. In 2002, the police arrested DMX for animal cruelty and drug possession. In 2004, he got charged with drunk driving. In 2008, he went to jail for 90 days for animal cruelty, drug possession, and theft. Every time he got arrested, DMX would promise to get clean, stay sober for a few months, then go right back to using drugs. But the biggest problem was coming, and it was going to destroy everything. The government was watching DMX's money, and they realized he wasn't paying his taxes. Despite earning over $70 million in his career, DMX owed the IRS over $1.7 million in unpaid taxes. In 2017, they sentenced him to 1 year in prison for tax evasion. How does someone who made $70 million end up owing the government money? Here's the truth that most people don't understand about the music business. When record companies give artists money, it's not free money, it's a loan. Every dollar spent on studio time, music videos, marketing, and touring gets subtracted from the artist's future earnings. So even though DMX was making millions, much of that money was already owed back to the record company. On top of that, DMX was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on crack cocaine. When you're buying drugs in large amounts regularly, it adds up incredibly fast. Add in the cost of multiple homes, luxury cars, legal fees, and supporting 15 children with different women, and you start to understand how someone can earn millions, but still end up broke. Here's something that will break your heart. DMX's relationship with his children. He had 15 kids with different women, and he loved every single one of them more than life itself. But addiction made him an unreliable father. He would promise to come to birthday parties and not show up. He would promise to take his kids on trips and then disappear for weeks. His oldest son Xavier has talked about what it was like growing up as DMX's child. He said there were times when his father would be the most loving present dad in the world, playing with them, teaching them about life, showing them unconditional love. But then there were times when DMX would vanish, and Xavier wouldn't know if his father was dead or alive. The worst part was that DMX's kids could see their father's pain, even when they were young. Children are smart, they know when something is wrong with their parents. DMX's kids knew their father was hurting, but they were too young to understand addiction or mental illness. All they knew was that sometimes daddy was happy and fun, and sometimes daddy was sad and gone. DMX's wife Tashera later wrote about finding crack pipes hidden around their house. She would flush them down the toilet, and DMX would get angry, but then he would just buy more. She described living in constant fear, never knowing if the phone would ring with news that DMX had overdosed or been arrested. That's no way for anyone to live, especially not with children in the house. The mansion in Westchester County became a symbol of how fast success can disappear. DMX couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments because all his money was going to drugs and legal fees. The bank took the house back, and it sat empty for years. Vandals broke in and spray-painted graffiti on the walls. The lawn grew wild, windows got broken, and the million-dollar mansion became a ruin. Photos of the abandoned house went viral online, showing the world how far DMX had fallen. As DMX's career declined in the late 2000s and 2010s, his health got worse too. Years of heavy drug use had damaged his heart and other organs. He had multiple heart attacks, and his weight would go up and down dramatically. Friends and family tried to help by staging interventions and getting him into rehab programs, but the addiction was stronger than their love. In interviews from this time period, you could see the exhaustion in DMX's eyes. He looked like a man who was tired of fighting a battle he couldn't win. He would talk about wanting to get clean for his kids, but then he would disappear again for weeks at a time. Let me tell you about the last few years of DMX's life, because this is where you can really see how addiction destroys everything. By 2010, DMX was still trying to make music, but his voice was different. Years of smoking crack had damaged his throat and lungs. His performances were unpredictable. Sometimes he would sound amazing, and sometimes he could barely get through a song. But the hip-hop community never abandoned him. Other rappers would invite DMX to collaborate, not because they needed him for their careers, but because they loved him and wanted to help. Jay-Z, Nas, Eminem and other superstars would reach out to DMX, offering him opportunities to get back on track. The problem was that DMX couldn't stay clean long enough to take advantage of these opportunities. He would start a project, get excited about it, work on it for a few days, and then vanish when the drugs called him back. This happened over and over again, and each time it broke his heart a little more. In 2019, DMX did an interview where he talked about wanting to die. He said he was tired of fighting the addiction, tired of disappointing people, tired of living in pain. It was one of the most heartbreaking things ever captured on camera. A man who had given so much joy to the world through his music, but who couldn't find any joy in his own life. But then something amazing happened in 2020. During the pandemic, when everyone was stuck at home, someone organized a versus battle between DMX and Snoop Dogg. Over 500,000 people watched live as DMX performed his greatest hits from his living room. For 2 hours, he was the old DMX, energetic, passionate, connected to his music and his fans. People were crying watching it because they realized how much they had missed him. But the comeback never happened. On April 2, 2021, DMX suffered a massive heart attack at his home in White Plains, New York. The heart attack was caused by a drug overdose, crack cocaine mixed with a deadly drug called fentanyl. Paramedics rushed him to White Plains Hospital, where doctors put him on life support machines to keep him alive. For 1 week, DMX's family, friends and fans around the world prayed for a miracle. Hundreds of people gathered outside the hospital, holding vigils and playing his music. Social media was flooded with prayers and memories from celebrities and regular fans alike. Everyone was hoping DMX would wake up and get another chance at life. On April 9, 2021, after consulting with doctors, DMX's family made the most difficult decision anyone could ever make. They decided to remove him from life support and let him go peacefully. DMX was 50 years old when he died. The news of DMX's death sent shockwaves around the world. It wasn't just hip-hop fans who mourned. DMX's people from all walks of life remembered how his music had touched their lives. Tributes poured in from fellow rappers, actors, athletes, and millions of regular people who felt like they had lost someone they knew personally. DMX's memorial service was held at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, the same arena where he had performed many times. Alicia Keys, Nas, Eve, and other major artists performed in his honor. Celebrities like Kanye West came to pay their respects. But the most powerful moment was when his longtime friend and producer Swizz Beatz spoke about DMX's battle with addiction, reminding everyone that addiction is a disease, not a choice or moral failing. The aftermath of DMX's death revealed some shocking truths about his finances. When lawyers went through his estate, they found that he owed money to almost everyone. The IRS, record companies, former managers, lawyers, and even family members. His total debts were over $1 million, but his assets were worth less than $50,000. But here's something that shows the real tragedy of DMX's situation. His music was still making money. His songs were being streamed millions of times, his albums were still selling, and movies were still paying to use his music. The problem was that most of that money was going to pay off old debts and contractual obligations. Very little was actually reaching DMX or his family. This is a common problem in the music industry, especially for artists who don't understand the business side of their careers. Record companies advance money to artists, but that money has to be paid back before the artist sees any profits. DMX had received millions in advances over the years, but his drug addiction prevented him from fulfilling many of his contractual obligations, which meant he kept owing more and more money. But the most heartbreaking part of DMX's financial situation was that his children, who needed his support the most, were the ones who suffered. Child support payments were often late or missed entirely because DMX's money was tied up in legal battles and debt payments. These kids didn't ask to be born to a famous father, they just needed their dad to take care of them, and his addiction made that impossible. DMX's story teaches us several important lessons. First, childhood trauma doesn't disappear just because you become famous and rich. The little boy who was beaten and abandoned was still inside the superstar, still hurting, and looking for ways to stop the pain. Second, the music industry can be predatory, taking advantage of artists who don't understand business and contracts. Third, addiction is a disease that can destroy anyone, regardless of how much money or talent they have. But DMX's legacy isn't just about tragedy. His music continues to inspire new generations of artists and fans. His honesty about his struggles helped make it okay for other rappers to talk about mental health and addiction. Artists like Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Logic have all said that DMX influenced them, especially his willingness to be vulnerable and real in his music. DMX proved that you don't have to be perfect to make perfect music. Some of the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain. His songs gave hope to people who felt hopeless, strength to people who felt weak, and a voice to people who felt unheard. The abandoned mansion still stands today, a reminder of both DMX's incredible success and tragic downfall. But his real legacy isn't in that broken building, it's in the millions of lives he touched with his music and his story. DMX's life shows us that fame and money can't heal old wounds or cure addiction. But it also shows us the power of turning pain into art, of being honest about struggle, and of touching other people's lives through raw, authentic expression. Earl Simmons suffered more than most people could imagine, but he used that suffering to create something beautiful that will live forever.